Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Spilled. We are bringing you history's hottest gossip every other Tuesday. As usual, we're your hosts, Kendall
and Delaney.
And if you're looking at us on TikTok, you might also notice we have a special guest, Kona. She is the third co-host, so go over to the TikTok if you want to see that.
And for starters, we just want to say thank you guys for 10K on TikTok.
So
that
crazy.
Is insane. That's insane. Just all of the engagement from you guys is so inspiring for us and just really lets us know that things are resonating with you guys and you're enjoying the podcast. So keep engaging and we will keep pushing more and more out for you guys.
We are so excited. We have so many ideas for growing the community and new episodes. And you guys have given us such good suggestions. Be so confident that I am writing down every single one of your guys' suggestions. I'm also noting who gave them. And there might be a world in which, I don't want to give anything
PR
away.
List.
Yeah. Once we get a legit PR list, no, but we'll want to say thank you somehow if we pick your episode. So we have been so obsessed with all the feedback. It's really, really affirming, if nothing else, that what we're doing is resonating with you guys. And it really inspires us to invest more time at this point, more money, our personal money and stuff like that into this podcast because we really think it can be something great. So thank you. Without further ado, Delaney, what are we talking about today?
Thank you, Kendall. Today, we're going to be talking about the Amazons of Dahomey. Now, you've probably heard the name Amazons before, Amazonians before, but within my research, guys, holy crap, did I find a different meaning to that name and the people who, it's just insane, guys. So today we're going to be going into the untold story of the Amazons of Dahomey, a army of female warriors who battled the French, scared them, and ditched femininity in all aspects. So let's get into it.
Okay, well, raise your hand if you just recorded for 2 hours and then realized that you weren't recording at all. Yeah, if you guys can't see us, we're both raising our hands. This is our second time going through this. And yes, if you are a loyal fan, you'll know that this is the 5th time this has happened where we tend to re-record. This is the first time it's been an actual recording nightmare, though. Usually we just try to make it perfect.
Without further ado.
Without any further ado, Delaney, will you give us a little bit of context of what is going on in the world where people can kind of benchmark the time period that we're talking about today to things they're more familiar with?
All right, so very broad time period wise, we're talking about 1600s through the late 1800s. So if you're thinking U.S. history, that is, early colonialism all the way through, the end past the Civil War. It's 1861. And if you're thinking Europe, if you're thinking England in specific, then that would be from the reign of Queen Elizabeth I through Queen Victoria. So solid almost 300 plus years we're going to be covering today. However, we're going to do it. I tell you those dates not so you remember them and you know that it started in this date. I tell you that so you guys have a general idea of the time period that we're in, so you kind of understand what the world is going through at this point in time.
Okay, and where in the world are we?
So we're in Western Africa. Now, the Kingdom of Dahomey was located in what's modern-day Benin, close to, Nigeria, to kind of give you a sense, this is Western Africa. And there were kind of neighboring conflicts with the Yoruba states like Oyo and especially Abeokuta. You'll kind of hear those further along the line in the episode and how they and how those conflicts played a huge part in Dahomey's history as well as the Amazon warriors. So within the Kingdom of Dahomey, they practiced the Fawn religion. Now, this religion is very complex, so I'm just going to go through a few points just so you get a general idea of it. Now, their supreme deity was Mawo Lisa. Now, this was a male/female creator, so somewhat non-binary, somewhat gender fluid, and this kind of gives an idea of kind of how their social scene operated within the kingdom when it came to gender roles, and kind of gives you a precursor to their kind of inversion of gender dynamics. So within the Fon religion, they had these voodoo, which were their spirits of war, of fertility, of thunder, of the sea. They were these, you kind of think like a polytheistic religion. They were their spirits that they worshipped to. It's very similar to Greek mythology. I mean, those were more towards to people's actual gods. These are spirits, so think more ancestral. But again, we can also relate that to the Egyptians as well. So if you kind of think kind of somewhat polytheistic, but these voodoo, they were their spirits of these many different categories that they would worship through.
So from what I understand about like spirits and especially polytheistic religions, but also like just a general religion, the human brain tries to make sense of things, and that these spirits are typically spirits over like natural phenomenon, because that is how they explain things. Like Apollo brought the sun up because that's how they explained the sunrise, right? My question to you, Delaney, what natural phenomenon would you create a spirit for?
For me, mine would be beauty. I would say the divine feminine beauty. I don't think anyone will ever be able to explain that. I think it truly is a natural phenomena for the ages.
I was going to take a slightly different route, but I like that. I like that.
Give me your route. What was your route?
I think a phenomenon I don't understand and perhaps never will would be like male entitlement.
I like that.
The male audacity. I feel like we're just wondering a lot of times as women, like how men have the audacity. And if I had a spirit that could explain that to me a little bit better, seems like that's a very naturally occurring phenomenon that I just don't have the answers to. So like, where does it come from? What happens? What do I do? You know how like in ancient times, they knew if they did something bad, there would be like thunder or there'd be like a hurricane. What do I do that creates this audacity in men? You know?
That is truly a mystery, Kendall. And what is not a mystery, however, is, here's a question to sidetrack. Have you ever heard the word voodoo before?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you hear the word voodoo, what does that normally mean? Like, what does that normally, what does that term normally describe?
So typically when I'm in a situationship that's going really poorly, I personally pay like an Etsy witch to do some voodoo. So for me, I'm thinking New Orleans, I'm thinking witchcraft, I'm thinking like vague tribal associations, but like I'm honestly mostly thinking of voodoo dolls and like cursing my exes.
Right. So somewhat of a not religiously tied, but sort of kind of a mystic, magical sort of
I'm thinking
practice.
like witchcraft, incense, voodoo dolls. Yeah.
But all of which has always just traditionally been kind of classified as myth or as, you know, not necessarily a
magic. It like falls in the realm of like
right.
magics and psychics for me.
Exactly. And so the reason I brought up that point was to say, as I said, their spirits of war were called their voodoo. And this is a great point to bring up because it is very, very classic within history that we see, you know, for an example, we see European colonists, European settlers coming in to places, they hear words and, you know, from some sort of arrogance almost, they go back home and they say, oh, I heard this word and it means this. Or they're too lazy and they shorten it, or they change it and they change the meaning. And so finding a lot of the origins of some of the words that we have, it also kind of discredits the meaning behind the original terms and what they truly meant. I mean, the voodoo, and they were spirits of war. I mean, this was a very crucial portion of their religion in which a word that now means is sort of...
It's been like bastardized.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's this sort of like mythical, magical like form of practice when
it's kind of a caricature now.
Exactly. So just wanted to point that out as I'm enlightening everyone about history and about the world of it. It's a huge point to bring up that everything needs to be changed. Back to our Ben Franklin episode, introspect, look into everything, question everything, figure out the true meaning, because some people got lazy along the line.
It's like in Madagascar when the giraffe is like having his like existential crisis and he goes to like the voodoo witch doctor. Obviously like it's set in Africa. So like that is a great example of the bastardization of this religious construct.
Now, within the Dahomey kingdom, their monarch, their king, was semi-divine, okay, meaning that he served as both the ruler and the high priest. And again, within their religion that they practiced, a high priest wasn't necessarily what we would think of today if you think of Catholicism or Christianity or even Judaism within their churches. Very, very different. It was way more of a kind of deep indigenous symbolic religion that they were following. So a priest was a much more kind of divinely ordained title to hold. And so the king was the all father. That was the main monarch and main leader in all aspects.
Okay, that helps paint a little context on the Dahomey kingdom. And so now for the Amazon women, what's their origin story? Like, I'm also interested in how they got their name. Amazon, to me, makes me think of the fact that my matcha order was supposed to come today and it didn't. Now it's coming tomorrow. And if it's not that, I'm thinking rainforest. How where is that coming about?
Well, it kind of gets coined with the French. They called them les Amazones, somewhat of an exotic term. This is coined around the 1840s, and then later Forbes really articulates it in 1851, labeling them as the Amazons. And this comes from a pretty direct comparison to the mythic Amazons of classical Greece. If you've seen Wonder Woman, then you kind of know an example of what we're talking about. A legendary tribe of women, warriors, who all originated. This is from Greek mythology, okay? Not real, myth. Now, a lot of people, when they hear of the Amazons, that's who they think of. And it's why the French immediately thought to think back to European history to explain things. Okay, so where in our history can we kind of relate this? You know, this is an African tribe, but what we can do is we could relate this to European history, right? So they're the Amazons. And what this further did is it allowed the European society to marvel at these women in arms, women in battle, women in armor and fighting, without having to abandon and or rethink their own gender norms or gender roles. So they could kind of file that under myth, made real, but mainly myth, instead of unleashing social chaos in which enlightening women, hey, there's a whole army of women and they're kind of outperforming the men, which means that you're capable of that. Absolutely not. They were not going to tell them that. They were not going to let them know that. So what they did is they gave them a title to almost make it sound way too good to be true and also way too exotic to ever happen in Europe.
That's really interesting. And I feel like we're going to have some really good conversations on the gender dynamics in this episode. So what's the deal with these women? Can you explain their role in the Dahomey kingdom?
Yeah, so where the French and the Europeans knew them as the Amazons, to the kingdom of Dahomey, they were known as both either the Ahosi, or the wives of the king, or the Mino, meaning our mothers. So it kind of gives you an idea of, first of all, the difference in the meaning of the names. You know, the Europeans called them the Amazons, and they called them in a translation either the wives of the king or their mothers, kind of highlighting the high status they held and importance. I mean, they were their mothers of the kingdom, and also the wives of the king. And like I added, the most powerful person within the kingdom. So they held a very, very high station within the social and political and economic scene within Dahomey and Western Africa.
And so now this is wives of the king, right?
Yes, exactly. And it actually began as a ceremonial bodyguard to the king. That is what this female army was originally created for. And later on, when we see King Jezo come into play in 1818 to around 1858, he's the one who somewhat credits himself or fully credits himself with the origination of the Amazon women. However, we have indigenous reports that say and really state that there was an army of warrior women in the early 1800s prior to King Jezo's rule.
Okay, so classic. He was just taking credit. Probably boosted it up, but like taking credit for the concept.
Yeah.
We've seen this before. Yeah. Let me call on my spirits. It's the male audacity. Back.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely did not create them or build this army. However, he did somewhat rebuild it and I quote, institutionalized it. When he came into reign, he often kind of recruited captives that had no family ties, raised them from childhood in an attempt to ensure their loyalty. So he kind of began this whole idea of kind of like succession. Like he had these young and raising them up. So eventually, if one of the Amazons were killed or passed away or whatever it was, there was another one to come in and replace them who had been raised within that culture their whole lives.
Okay, and so recruiting from captivity really sounds like an oxymoron. Can we talk a little bit about captivity and slavery in this time period as well?
Yeah, of course. And listen, although our focus isn't directly on Dahomey today, it's more so on the Amazon women, it is very important to note, like what's going on in the world, what's going on within the kingdom, and what was their involvement when it came to the slave trade. So Dahomey had this sort of annual cycle of warfare, which were typically slave raids. Okay. Now, this was tied to their kind of annual month-long festival. And this was a festival of ancestral worship. Now, during these raids, they would bring back the captives, and they were either sold into the Atlantic slave trade or they were sacrificed in ritual ceremonies. Now, to backtrack a little bit, it was not uncommon at all for these African kingdoms to be heavily involved within the slave trade to boost their own economy. As sad as it is, enslavement was a large portion of the worldwide economy at this point in time, meaning if you removed it, you had a gap in the economy that would crumble. Now, that is not in any way me saying that slavery was and or is essential to any kingdom or any civilization or anything at that at all. But it's more so explaining that at that point in time, there really wasn't anywhere that was explicitly excluded from it. The idea of enslavement was seen in almost a broader sense in which you capture people, you take them, you hold them against their will, and you put them to work. That is more so the sense that we're talking about when it comes to Dahomey's history. Now, again, later on, they do participate in the selling and exportation of slaves. But this wasn't as a abandonment of their own culture, of the people in Africa. They were
exporting something that they had already been participating in. To circle it back to the idea, though, of recruiting captives, Delaney, like that, like I said, it sounds like an oxymoron to me. Like, how do you recruit someone that's a captive? Where do you think we're falling on the scale of like from we willingly participate in this all the way to like we have to do this, and then maybe in the middle there's something like, well, there's a lot of pressure, this is a big honor to do it, so we kind of have to, we can't say no. Where are the Amazon women on this in terms of like the king tapping them?
From the recorded history that we have, it seems to be somewhat half and half. We have some that were, again, captives. Now, the ones that were captives, we seem to have evidence that they were raised, again, from childhood under the king's arm. So they were raised to be Amazons, and therefore it was all they ever knew. They had no family ties. Now, the other ones who were recruited later on had to cut all family ties. So you were essentially, and it's actually pretty similar to what you see in a lot of civilizations, king's ceremonial guard or anybody who is having that really close counsel to the monarch typically does have to remove all of their personal life from everything. And so along with the women having to, if they did have a family, abandon that, cut all family ties, which, again, were very, very deep-rooted. When we look into African history, that is not an easy tie to cut for anybody, but also for these large familial networks. It was big. That and for the women to become an Amazon or a Mino or a Hosi, they had to go through an initiation. which typically was the sacrifice and or murder killing of a captive.
Oh, wow. So that's another layer of where this idea of slave trade captivity is coming into play.
Yes. And so sadly enough as it is, the slavery system not only kind of fed their initiation, but also their training. So we also have evidence that they were a lot of the times used within training as dummies, like punching bag, like as human practice, as targets.
Wow.
And we need to remember, guys, this is a very different point in time. This is a very different environment and climate than what we would think is portrayed in mainstream media. So by kind of capturing and raising these women to become soldiers, which is what we see King Jezo do later in his reign, this is the best way to ensure loyalty. And it's not uncommon. Again, we see this time and time again throughout other civilizations.
It's your classic conditioning, like take someone very young, teach them everything they'll ever know, ensure loyalty and dependence.
Well, that, and they were given a high title. I mean, they were right next to the king. They were the wives of the king. And another portion I should add, within this initiation, these women were pledged to celibacy. Now, this was not the idea of celibacy, right? Come on now. What is this, England?
Is anyone fucking?
Well, yes, actually they were. Now, this did not mean that they were celibate point blank. It just meant that they were married to the king. So
they
the
were
only
exclusive.
person. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. They not only would serve, fight, protect the king, but they would do other favors as well. If you know what I'm saying.
A little handy, a little blowy.
Oh,
you never know.
Isn't this labeled as family friendly?
I actually do have this marked as clean on all of the streaming platforms, but we might have to change that.
I think we have to change that.
Okay.
But essentially what this meant is that these women warriors were tied to the king in more ways than one. They were his wife. They were his protectors, his army, and therefore...
the mothers of the kingdom.
Yes.
Okay, mother. Yeah. Okay, you're called to serve.
Okay, Miss Me, no, my mother. Give her to me. I need my mommy. So continuing on with kind of some context on the initiation and how you became an Amazon and how that happened, we should also note the fact that when these women committed to the service, okay, it meant a symbolic rebirth as men. A member of the Amazon army told Forbes in 1850, and I quote, "We were women, we are now men. Jezo has born us again." So essentially, killing of an enemy, of a captive for that initiation was not just an initiation into the army, but it was an initiation into manhood.
That is so fascinating to me because, so basically, these were women fulfilling the traditional role of a man, as history likes to think, right? Like they're the fighters. They're kind of, it sounds like this elite force, right? They're like the special forces. We typically see that represented through a masculine lens. I was hoping that this would redefine femininity in a sense where it's like, look, women can be doing, they can do this, they can fight, they can execute, all this stuff. But it's really interesting to hear that made them men. We're still assigning all those attributes to men at the end of the day, where instead of this being like, wow, look at those badass women equals women are badass, it's wow, look at those badass women equals men.
Yeah, and within the kind of Amazon culture, courage was masculine and cowardice was feminine. So they still kept those somewhat concrete gender ideals and just somewhat swapped places. I guess the idea was that certain acts made you feminine or made you masculine, but that wasn't defined by your gender.
Yeah, it was almost a fluidity to it of you could at one time possess masculine and feminine traits, Very interesting. I don't know. It's kind of a lot to consider. I also feel like I'm personally trying to be in my feminine a bit more. Like, I don't know if any of my friends are listening to this, they've heard me say this. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this idea of like feminine energy, masculine energy, da 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 da. Spoiler alert, I'm a little hyper independent firstborn child. So I struggle being in touch with my femininity and receiving and all that stuff. So like, I don't want to get too much into it, but the idea of like being in touch with my feminine, I've been reading up on that a lot lately. And so I feel like this concept of like there are feminine things and masculine things, and then like how that is brought out in every single person is interesting. But I do feel like it's sad that at the end of the day, like women aren't even getting credit. Like these are women doing these things, and then they're saying that it's through their manhood, basically, that they can be accomplished. So I have mixed feelings on this for sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Kay. I mean, I agree with you, honestly. It's kind of mind-boggling to think of the ideas being changed, but still and yet the gender roles kind of stay the same, but it's just the people within the roles, we're switching it up. Now, a lot of the information that we gain when it comes to African history as a whole, and I say that very sparingly because Africa is huge. It's a continent, and the history, I mean, you can't even just say that there's like a history of Africa. I mean, there is a very vague, broad history of Africa in a sense, but it is so complex when you go down to all the sections, all the countries within the continent. So I say that in a very broad sense, but most of the information that we get was through oral tradition and storytelling.
And we like oral history here. Keep your minds out of the gutter, you crazy cats. We love our little oral history. It's gossip. That is entirely what this podcast is about. We are yapping. Oral history is nothing if not just yapping through history. We only recently started writing it down, so hello.
And they loved it too, let's just say. I mean, they even had songs to kind of celebrate the whole swap of this whole gender inversion. I mean, and I quote, "Men stay home to farm, we women march to war." Oh. They were kind of like they were proud of it. It was almost like this flaunting that, hey, this is a new normal. You guys farm, take care of the babies. We'll be off marching and parading to war while you guys have fun with that. Because we're better at it, clearly.
I don't want this to sound so ignorant, but I just have to say it's interesting because there's like quite a few animals in the animal kingdom in Africa where this model is also very mimicked, where like the female lion hunts.
I'm so glad you made that point, Kendall. And if you guys didn't know, I was actually recently in South Africa in May, and this is going to sound fake, but I swear to God it's true. As I was holding the tail of a male lion walking through the South African bush, I was asking some of the game lords, okay, so I've heard that the women are kind of the leaders, but what's going on here? And not only did they explain it to me, but I got to bear witness to the fact that the female lions are the alphas, point blank. They are alphas over the males. So, and that is in every sense. They eat before the male lions will sit there while the females eat.
Hell yeah.
Going against their instinct. Right. Not only that, but they said that the female lions will dictate which men can come in and mate with who and when they can come in and do it.
That's right.
They do the hunting, okay? As people have heard before. I mean, guys, I then also went to ask, I said, so is this just lions? Is this just, and he said, no, it's the entire animal kingdom, humans included.
Yes, this is what I'm saying.
And guys, when I tell you that he said this with not an ounce of humor in his tone, he said, yeah, I mean, this is the entire animal kingdom, including humans. Women are the leaders. And throughout the entire duration of my trip, I kept a close eye on it. All the elephant herds, every giraffe pack, all of them were led by women. And I just thought it's such a great point to bring up because I think this whole idea of a gender aversion needed to happen at some point so we could prove it could happen and prove that it could be done, that we don't need to succumb to these roles that are, or labels that are placed on us at birth.
By
and
the
really
patriarchy.
Can be capable. Screw the patriarchy. We are women and we are here to cut your heads off.
Oh.
Huzzah.
Okay, well, thank you for the boots on the ground journalism, Delaney. Great backing me up. Thank you. No, I just think it's fascinating. Like if it is true, this is speculation. Kendall's going off again. Odds are that a lot of these very historic traditions were based off of nature, right? So like I could absolutely see them going, okay, well, the female lions are hunting, so like our females are the ones hunting. Fascinating. Also, though, I will say, if any of the government officials are listening to this podcast, leave me out of it.
Yeah,
leave me out of the
back
draft.
To that.
No, we can. We can. I don't want
Doesn't
to.
mean we will.
No, I don't want to. So when it comes to a draft, for example, know that we can. Know that we could.
We're capable.
Lose my number. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely don't think we would be the top picks to be drafted. I would more say it would be, I don't know, the women who, let me see here, carried severed heads or scalps to display their victory.
Wait, hold on. The Amazon women's carried heads around?
Yes, in parades, okay.
Not just like as the latest accessory. This is the pre-fall head. It's more of an autumnal color palette.
No, this was a display of victory for them. And apparently oftentimes it would be female heads because, again, they had adopted this idea of manhood. And so they would carry, they would show that they defeated women as, they're men.
I don't love that.
Neither do I. However, history is history and we don't have to love it to share it, right?
No, it's good. I think it's important that, like, as we share these stories, we don't romanticize them. Like, these were women that still kind of embodied a little bit of those patriarchal beliefs. It's like just there's a lot of interesting duality in the conversation. So good point. But, leave me out of that as well. I'd like to keep my head.
Well, so did the Europeans because they repeatedly would note that they judged the women to be faster reloaders and more disciplined than any of the male soldiers.
Wow.
So scholars like Richard F. Burton even go as far as to say that they were the most dreaded of the king's troops, and he even goes later on to really emphasize their extraordinary intrepidity. Again, this is a male writer, and this is 1864, okay? So pretty good at getting head is what I'm hearing. Hey-o. No, but seriously, they sound terrifying, to be honest. And I can only imagine that, like, at this time period as well, like, we see a lot of the very kind of exotic and animalistic depictions of the Europeans' first impressions of African kingdoms and tribes. I can only imagine, on top of them having never seen these types of people before, they see a bunch of fucking badass women running the show. Like, that's a double mind fuck. First of all, they're like, who are these people? Right? And blue.
Sorry. Over time, they obviously are familiar with them. But, like, initially, I have never seen people that look like this before. And then, is that a woman? Is she carrying a head?
And she says, no, bitch, I'm a man. The fuck? Back up. Give me your head.
A little complicated there.
A little bit.
The OG gender fluidity conversations, I guess.
Yeah, but they really did not play around whatsoever. Burton continues to write that within these battles, it was heavily observed that the male soldiers often broke their ranks first, meaning I don't know, let's think 300 people are running at you. The men run and the women stood firm to all accounts. So essentially, guys, the Amazons were part of the Dahomey army, except they were the special ops force. Like, they were Task Force X. If things were going wrong, if you needed the best of the best, you needed your mercenaries, like your top people, you called the women. You called the Amazons. And you called for your Mino. You said,
your
Mommy.
mother.
You called for your mother. They said, Mother, come help me. We're running. right? I mean, seriously, it goes against everything that I think the Europeans knew about women, but also believed about what they were capable of. So it was honestly the most, in my opinion, it was the kind of ultimate element of surprise to not only have a whole, again, task force coming at you, the top trained warriors, but not only that, they're women. Oh, not only that, they're African and you're French. Like, at that point in time, that was scary to them. And again, it's why these warriors were so successful in their combat and in their war culture. It was half the element of surprise, that, and man, were they skilled. Holy crap.
I also find it interesting because it's such a stark difference between the role women played in this time period in Europe and in colonial America, where it was very much like in and around the home. If they were working or had any sort of like labor outside the home, it was typically because it was either a time of war and we needed the labor because the men were all fighting, or they were very poor and like both people needed to work on the farm or whatever to sustain the family.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's really amazing where I almost feel like the typical Western arc of femininity or like feminism is that women were these domestic maternal creatures until they weren't in the women's suffrage movement in America. Like it was kind of this like, I always think of it, it's a very linear timeline the way you learn it, but in fact like in different parts of the world, there was all these different ways that women were interacting in society that are like not the same as the typical timeline we think of like, well, women weren't and then they were and now we're almost there. You know what I mean?
That's a really unique point, okay? I mean, and as the songs would say, men should farm, women will fight. Men should farm, women will fight. They fight, they fight, they fight. They fight the men, they'll farm. Women, they'll fight. Men, they'll farm. Wow, we just took the most classic, like, white take on that song.
We're like, what if it was jazz? But jazz has roots to the Black culture down south,
yes, it
so
does.
it all circles back. Okay, well, other than the fact that that song's absolutely going to be stuck in my head for the next couple days, and lucky for you guys, we only publish currently every 2 weeks. So you've got 2 weeks, 14 days to be singing that song. I also want to touch on the fact that obviously in Hollywood, they came out with The Woman King with Viola Davis. Also, side note, she has an amazing memoir, if you guys are readers, which everyone should be, but she's got a great memoir. So highly recommend that. It's called Finding Me by Viola Davis. Anywho, she acted in it. I actually think she might have produced The Woman King. It is about the Dahomey Amazon woman fighters. One thing that I feel like they focused on a lot in that movie was their practice and the training and like how badass they were. Is there any color you can add to that on like what they actually had to go through? I know they had to kill someone to get in, so I can only imagine it goes up from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the movie actually does a pretty accurate representation of showing their training. I mean, from the evidence that we have, we see that they trained in thorn hedge climbing. Obviously, that they had that initiation. There were practices and rituals around the war cries, the songs. I mean, you have to keep in mind that this is deeply rooted in African culture, right? And so within their religion and everything, this was all practiced in tandem with their warfare. They wouldn't survive. They wouldn't win a war if they weren't in good standing with their religion. So we see the war cries, dances, frequent rituals, obviously are parading around with severed heads. We love it. But their training was intense. And oftentimes, as we mentioned before, they would have captives serve as target practice, I guess you could say, for them. And also we have records, and this is sort of how they come on the European map. We see in around the 1740s, the French note that there were a female army that was parading and drilling. If you don't know what drilling is, if you've ever seen,
Cadet
it's
Kelly.
essentially like, yes, if you've
ever seen Cadet Kelly, Then you'll know.
Or if you've ever gone to a college and you have cadets at your school, you know what a drill field is. You know what the drilling is.
Go Hokies.
And I had to mention it. If you know what that is, then you kind of understand. It's almost a display of strength. It's kind of a, hey, look how many people we have. Look at the discipline. We're all stepping at the same time. Don't mess with us because it's not left, hey, left, right, left. No. But anyway, what I'm saying is they were frequent. They were out. They were training. They were exactly what you would expect from, again, this like high task force within an army. So just because they were women, it didn't function any differently. And remember, they were men. They had been initiated into manhood. So they functioned, they practiced just as, if not higher and heavier than, I mean, I would compare it. This is kind of crazy because there were a lot of things that were very different, but I could very, very, very minorly compare it to the training of the Spartans. Very intense, very active. Now, that's very, very different, very, very different culture. But some aspects of it, if you want to think like a rigorous army that's focused on warfare, right, that's cultures around warfare, that's what the Amazons were about.
It seems also like culture of inciting fear in their enemies.
For sure.
Interesting. Obviously, the Amazon women don't necessarily exist anymore. What's the kind of arc there?
Well, you know, we've mentioned the French quite a bit throughout the beginning of the episode with their kind of origin to the Western world, into Europe. But when we hit the Franco-Dahomey Wars, that's 1890, around to 1894, this is when the French really boost everything up and really give the Amazons a run for their money. The French were historically really... They seemed enamored at the Amazons. They even have exhibitions, which is really disheartening. Kind of makes you sick to my stomach. But they had these exhibitions of captured Amazon women where it would be an exhibition, a sight to see, a warrior woman, an indigenous, you know, exotic warrior woman. And they would be put on display for all people to see. So we knew like the French were really kind of enamored with this whole idea of a woman being anything but a domestic servant, pretty much. But furthermore, they had continuously fought each other and sometimes lost. And the French did not take that easily. So they come in hot, they come in heavy. And at the Battle of Aegean, 1892, there were about 434 roughly Amazons that charged the French, and only 17 of them survive. So,
wow, that's a devastating military loss.
Yes, they brought they brought all their guns. I mean, they did everything that they could. The French were not going to stand that any longer, and so the French conquest in 1984 ends the core of the Amazons. And so actually one of the survivors named Yahi, she agreed to an interview in 1934. And shockingly, she was interviewed by a French reporter. So maybe some tensions there. But in this interview, she recalls the Franco-Dahomey War as one of the, you know, last active Amazons. Like she was saying she was one of the few to survive. She talks about the fearlessness that they had, how they would always fight to the death and never, ever surrender to the French. So it was almost an honor for them to die fighting the French because they would have never given up to them. And she even kind of confirms that the Amazon Corps, these army of women, they survived the fall of Dahomey. So it almost proves, too, they were not explicitly tied to the Dahomey kingdom in the way that everybody had kind of assumed and thought they were. In her testimony, it claims that it kind of lived into the 20th century, even after the Corps was kind of officially dissolved in 1894.
Wow. Well, certainly their legacy has been carried out. I got a nice little ignorant question for us to end on.
Ooh.
I feel like I've heard of these women warriors before, and I've heard of the concept of the Amazon warriors before. To be super honest with you, and like I say in every episode, I consider myself pretty educated. Not super educated in history, but like a pretty good, well-rounded education. I fully thought upon the introduction of this topic, when you brought it up as a episode idea, I thought we would be in South Africa for this one. So a little bit of ignorance there. Perhaps I was confused. There is the Amazon rainforest. The other big kind of misconception I had going into this episode was I'd heard all these rumors about these female warriors cutting off one of their boobs. Is that true? Did they do this?
I hate to burst your bubble or left tit, but that was not.
My left one is bigger, so I would probably cut off the right one.
I am curious, like, which one I would choose, but
everyone leave us a comment down below. No, I'm kidding. Left or right? No, I'm kidding. So that wasn't true.
No, sadly enough. That is accredited to you're going to hate it, the Greek ones. Yeah. Greek mythological Amazon women. Although I think it would be extremely useful, and honestly, it's a really good idea. I'm not quite sure on why nobody picked up on that one.
Leave me out of that.
Well, you already know which one you would do. You already made the choice. So no, that was not the Amazons of Dahomey. It was Greek mythology story, and sadly not true. Would have been fun though.
I wonder, last thing I'll say, last little tangent I'll go on is like, I wonder how much of that mythology was also kind of showing this like perceived natural weakness of a woman where like we had to alter ourselves. Like we weren't naturally born to fight. We had to alter something to fight or to like be like, or to carry weapons or to be like effective. Like we had to remove part of our femininity in order to do it. I don't know. I'm getting a little metaphorical here, but I'm just
That's a really good point.
It's leaving me wondering.
To wrap things up, we really wanted to share this story today, guys. It's a term that I've heard before, I've seen it in movies, but it still remains an untold story. And a story at that of women who not only surpassed the expectations placed on them by men, but they actually became the men, and even then surpassed their capabilities when it came to one of the most credited masculine fields, warfare. I mean, they not only took their place, but they exceeded what they did. And to me, that is honorable. So what I'll take away from this episode is a man's head on my arm. Kendall.
Period.
What would your dinner party takeaway be for this episode?
I think my dinner party takeaway would be, well, firstly, the fact that they did not cut off their boobs. But second, I think just how complex the idea of gender was. Again, I just don't think we give African cultures enough credit when it comes to really anything. But like the concepts of feminine and masculine and how it can be more fluid than like it just compared to Western European history and colonial history at this time period. Like this was such a more dynamic view of gender roles. So I think that's my takeaway, is just like how complex it really is.
I mean, I love that, Kay. And honestly, I think no king in Europe, I can say this quite confidently, I don't think any European king would have ever not only like brought up, hire, create, like originate and but ceremonial bodyguard of women, but let alone allow for them themselves to grow into this insane fighting force. So you're right. I mean, a big credit to the Dahomey culture within Western Africa, because applause to them. They made the unthinkable happen, and they proved not only it could be done, but hell, they could be successful in doing it.
That was so well put, and I think that was a really great note to end on, Delaney. So thank you. Thank you for all the research that it takes to have such credible sources and such a comprehensive view of something that I honestly just don't think we really learn about in school. So thank you. Thank you guys, the listeners, for all of the engagement has been so amazing. Like it's truly, truly so heartwarming. We are really looking forward to, we've recorded this episode, not just actually recorded it this time, but like we have video footage. So look forward to some clips on social media. Don't forget to subscribe, share it, all this stuff. Suggestions. You guys, I did build out a little suggestion box. It's called the Tea Box. So if you want to suggest a topic for us to cover, whether it's something you're passionate about or you've learned, I've been really loving when people have suggestions from their home like cultures or ethnicities or countries or whatever that we don't learn about in like mainstream U.S. history, please suggest them. Go to the link in any of our bios. It's called the Tea Box. You'll find it. And give us a subscribe, a follow, any of that good stuff, reviews, anything really helps. We would love to extend the bandwidth to be able to do more. So with that, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you
in 2 Tuesdays.